Hey, good morning. This is People of Substance by Lemon Skies, and I am thrilled to introduce you to Adrian Slagle, like bagel. And so, Adrian and I actually, you're one of the few people that you and I have never met in person before. So I want
No, we
to talk
haven't.
to you and get to know you. So please say hi before I do all the introductions.
Sure, this will be fun. Hello. Good to finally chat with you. I feel like we have so many friends in common and I've been admiring your work from afar. So this will be fun. Hopefully I don't throw you any curveballs.
I hate to say that. So Adrian, you're the VP of Marketing at USO currently.
Yes.
I know you spent a long time at Operation Smile,
Mhm.
and you're a fellow Virginian, live a little bit south of me, closer to the beach.
Mhm.
But first question that I wanted to ask you about: how did you end up in nonprofit sector? It's always fascinating to hear the journeys. Were you one of those people where that was your path always, or did you sort of fall into it?
Yeah, I mean, that's so funny you ask. I definitely fall into that latter bucket. I mean, I wish that I could tell you that my career path was rooted in altruism from the beginning, and this was just something I felt really passionate about. But truth be told, coming straight out of college, I was working at a marina. So working more in like the hospitality and tourism industry. And it was wonderful. You mentioned I live near the water. I love boats. I love the water. And so I happened upon to get a job offer as an extension from my kind of like high school summer, college summer career. And they promoted me to do membership and marketing at a marina and yacht club locally. And so I was doing that for a while. And things were winding down there. The folks were getting ready to sell it, and my parents had a friend of the family that worked at an organization called Operation Smile, which you mentioned earlier, which is actually headquartered here in Virginia Beach. Most people don't know that, a large INGO. And I thought, hey, that doesn't sound so bad. I'll go check it out. The opportunity to travel the world, do some good. And so it just kind of panned out. I actually didn't get the first job I interviewed for, which was in programs. And that was exciting to me because I actually, it was sort of the position that they had there at the time. It was kind of like almost like Peace Corps in a way, the way they had structured it, where it was sort of this 2-year stint. And you kind of were assigned to a region and traveled around the world helping to coordinate medical missions. And it was so funny because I didn't get the job and I was so bummed, but they looked at my resume and looked at me and said, hey, you seem much more wired for development and marketing, like any interest in that. And so they kind of passed my resume along and I kind of just fell into it. And we had a very budding and new direct response program at the time. And that's kind of where my story started. I had no experience in that. I did not have a degree in marketing. I actually had a degree in public administration. I thought I was going to get into economic development and eventually go into a career in politics one day. But boy, was I wrong. And that definitely took a turn. And I'm really grateful for that because I feel like I landed in the place that was right for me. And I went on to have a really interesting journey and experience. Ended up staying at that organization for a little over a decade and had so many wonderful opportunities. Had such an amazing mentor and sponsor, and just learned and grew a lot and really quickly in that experience.
So my takeaway is not to hear what you're not saying. You're not running for office anytime soon.
No, I don't think so.
But what's always been interesting to me about Operation Smile, and that was my experience when I was at Special Olympics, it's sort of an organization that's known for one kind of thing, but it does so much more.
Absolutely. It's so funny because I mentioned we started out with a really small direct response program when I joined, and my boss and the leader at the time just really kind of rallied for investment and demonstrated how successful we could be. And boy, did it take off. I mean, almost to the point where that offer kind of like became the brand in a way. So then we were one surgery can change your life forever. Well, it was incredible. And that's sort of how I first got introduced to like which I think has become my sort of sweet spot, which is bridging the world of direct response and brand marketing. It's like, okay, well, this is the offer and this is what brings people in the door, but how can we tell more of that story and help people experience like all of the other wonderful things that happen at the organization, and really tell that story through the impact in changing lives. And that is sort of, what I became to love, is sort of playing in that space in the middle.
I love that, the brand and the fundraising, because they really shouldn't be separate buckets. I mean, it is one and the same, to your point. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So you're currently at USO, and I was hoping you could talk about your role there, your connection to the organization. And, I do have some friends from the military, and I think there's a lot of issues and areas that impact service members and their families that people don't realize. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my personal journey in terms of experience and related to service members, I mean, I live here in Virginia Beach, you mentioned earlier, and we have about 8 military installations down here in the immediate, like what we would call the Hampton Roads area. And I live very close to many bases, and so it's a big military community. And actually, like my personal relationship to that is, my grandfather's name was actually Adrian. I was named after him. And he was really my best friend and my hero growing up. Both my parents worked. My grandparents lived nearby. And so I would go to their house every day after school. And he taught me so much about, everything I've come to know and love, and really, was such an inspiration to me growing up. And he was in the Navy. He was a commander in the Navy when he retired. He was a meteorologist. There's a specific term for it that they use in the Navy. It's not called meteorologist, but anyway, he was so inspiring to me, and I learned so much from him. He was such a good man that I just kind of, when I saw this job pop up, I thought, what better way to kind of give back to someone who I really considered my hero. And I see so many folks in this community, who are serving our country and sort of protecting our freedoms. That was just really important to me. And it really spoke to me in terms of mission. And I also saw, through my mom telling me stories, et cetera, it's tough on the family as well. The families serve as much in as many ways as the service members themselves do. He was on the Yorktown, actually, when it went down in the Battle of, it was the Battle of Midway. I'm going to have to check my history there. Anyway, he had a really hard time. There were some sad stories that he shared and didn't really want to talk about it much. And then my mom shared with me as I got older, but he experienced some really difficult times when that ship was going down, and he saw his shipmates next to him, that some of them didn't make it. And that was tough to recover from. And there were some hidden things that, you never really saw growing up, but I know he struggled with a lot. And I know a lot of service members and families struggle with that. I mean, one piece of research that we lean into, and, it's May, it's Military Appreciation Month. It's also Mental Health and Awareness Month. And there's a lot of points of intersection there. One stat that was particularly shocking to me is that there's a 2021 piece of research that found that over 30,000 active duty personnel and veterans who served in the military post 9/11 have died by suicide. There have only been a little over 7,000 service members killed in combat in those same 20 years. Our programs really build resilience in service members, and we care about their safety and well-being, and that's really important to me as well.
So if I'm doing math in my head correctly, so it's almost 4 times as many service members died by suicide as did in combat or in some sort of military related situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a lot of our programs both are centered around wellness for families and those service members, and boosting morale. I mean, it can get lonely out there when you're on a deployment and you kind of have idle hands. I mean, you're always, there's this concept of readiness. You're always at the ready, and you never know what might happen next when you're involved in those situations. But there's a lot of downtime, and there's a lot of distance with your family. You're missing the things that you know and love from home. And so we really focus on helping to maintain that connection, providing internet service and Wi-Fi. We have gaming kits that we'll send out into the field, which is a fun way for service members to stay connected to home with their families. Like you'll have, a parent maybe playing Mario Kart with their family back home, which is such a fun thing. And that's something that they miss, and they can communicate with them in that way and stay connected. We have reading programs, where a family member that's deployed can read a bedtime story to their child back home and stay connected in that way. And then we have programs back on the home front for family members, spouses and children. So just making sure everyone's staying connected is really important to the things that they love and miss.
Well, and I love that we're talking more about kind of that emotional and social and mental factors that go hand in hand, because a lot of times you see somebody who is seemingly a very whole and healthy person, but you don't know what goes on under the surface.
We never know. And, it's not just restricted to the military population, it's all of us. In fact, our HR department hosted a mental health and wellness seminar yesterday that they sponsored, and I joined. And something really shocking to me was, I think it was 46% of Americans actually struggle with a mental disorder in their life, at least once in their lifetime. I mean, so look around, that's almost 1 out of every 2 of us. I know there are times when I'm not feeling so great. We all have our struggles, our bad days, but that can get intense sometimes. And I just think it's really important that we're all aware that, there's so much going on to people than what meets the eye. And we all sort of have our challenges.
That makes sense. So you and I are, we're a nonprofit sector, so we have very meaningful work. You read about purpose and kind of defining your purpose. And, we sort of have purpose in a way built into the work we do. But I know I've poked around in preparation for our conversation, and you've talked about kind of the concept of defining yourself by your work. So I was hoping you could speak to that. And do you see that as a good thing, as a not so good thing? I thought that was just a fascinating topic, because I keep seeing these statements, well, you're more than the job you do. It's like, yes, but maybe you're in the wrong field if you have to tell yourself that to be okay. So, so I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mentioned that I spent a little over a decade at the same organization, and it became, not necessarily in a bad way, but my job, I think I allowed my job to become so much of who I am and how I identify myself. Yeah. And not only that, but, I was, talk about imposter syndrome, right? I'm sure you've had conversations with people about that. And I think it's a very real thing. I mean, I grew very quickly and developed pretty quickly professionally in those roles I held over the years throughout that experience, to the point where I was appointed an associate VP at the age of 27. And I was managing 38 people by the time that I left within my department. And that was a lot of responsibility to take on for someone who was, barely pushing 30. And that's not to say that, I was so grateful for that experience. And I like to think that I did it well. But, when you are younger and you're given a lot of responsibility, I think it's very easy to think, I don't deserve this. How did I get here? What have I done to deserve this, when so many hardworking people are around me? And I think, I've come to realize that, there were very talented, competent leaders that saw something in me that made them think, wow, like she's really poised for this. Like, I think that she'll be incredibly successful, for these reasons. And I almost, it was interesting because as I matured and I came to realize, it wasn't just me not believing in myself. I'm by saying that I don't feel like I deserve this, or kind of questioning myself. It was also saying, well, do you not trust these people who, you've looked up to and you've felt were really capable and incredible and talented? You're basically saying, by not believing in yourself and having confidence in yourself, that they were wrong too. And so that made me think, when I kind of stumbled upon that perspective, and I had all these people coming to me saying, like, wow, like, you're doing such an amazing job. Like, your program is so strong. Like, you have such a talented team. What are you doing? And for so long, I didn't believe that I had anything to do with that. I wouldn't let myself believe it. As much external validation as I was getting, it was just really hard. So I came to a point where I started really leaning into it, and it became so much of who I was, right? So I almost kind of went so far in the other direction to where I was showing up, and this is who I was, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, I didn't have any hobbies. All I did was work. I was a total workaholic. Because I think it was that feedback loop and that constant validation that said, like, you're so good, you work so hard, like, and it just became who I was as a person. And so I leaned a little bit too far into that. And I had that was a really formative time for me in my career, as I was transitioning away from that organization and that role into the agency side. I needed something different to push myself and to prove to myself, you can do other things, you can do them well and be successful, regardless of where you are or kind of what work that you're doing. Like, you can apply that to other areas of your life professionally. So I think it's very easy to get lost in your career. And I think there's one thing to be said about purpose and, like, knowing what drives you, and having that be the center of it. But it's a completely other thing to let it sort of take over your identity and who you are. And that, I think I fell into that trap a little bit, to be honest.
I have to wonder, with organizations that have such a strong brand, I don't know much about culture, kind of internal culture, but the organizations with very strong brand, some of that branding sort of, permeates everything. Like, I think of Disney, and I think, you can't imagine somebody working at Disney who is sort of doesn't align with what the brand is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. And I think that's great. And I really am kind of obsessed with the fact that you can kind of own that as a piece of who you are, but also have other components to who you are as a person. I mean, I am not just today in the place that I am, the vice president of marketing at the USO, because I feel very passionate about service members and their families, and being, that those people who serve, serving them. I think that that's really incredibly important. And I take great pride in that. And it's so much of who I am. But at the same time, I'm a parent, I'm a friend. There are certain hobbies that I've developed that I feel passionate about outside of work. I love being outdoors. And I think that it's a balance. And I feel like I've sort of finally arrived at that. And it's taken a long time. But again, I think because I was such a younger person, feeling that I needed to prove myself, and make sure people felt confident in the fact that, like, I was very capable of doing this work. I think it had a lot to do with me and my own professional development and who I was. There's this concept of workism. I don't know if you read that in some of the pieces that I had written, but it's sort of it's an interesting one in that, particularly in American culture, sometimes people tend to do that when they don't have purpose outside of work. Like, work becomes your entire sole purpose and almost a religion of sorts. It's interesting. can share some resources.
It's not discouraged either.
Sorry, what was that?
Not discouraged.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, I think it's very much encouraged within our culture, which can be so individualistic and focused on, the individual. But that's where I think the nonprofit industry is so interesting and almost, we can kind of justify it in a way because so much of the work that we do is benefiting others, right? It's more altruistic in a way. And I think there's more of a sense of community wrapped around it and bigger, larger purpose. So I think in some ways, we're even, as nonprofit professionals, more apt to kind of losing ourselves in our work. Does that make sense?
It does. No, it really does. I was actually thinking about what you also were pointing to, individualism. And I think about how disconnected we are. When I live in a very close-knit community and we have events and we have get-together, like you really do run into people all the time, but not everyone has that. And I think about that gap and how place of employment can play that role, and sort of identity crisis that people have once they leave the job or retire, because they don't have that community to kind of fall back into.
Yeah, it's so hard. And I think that the higher you move up and the more responsibility you have, it becomes more undifficult to unravel that. I mean, I think about CEOs who are heading into retirement, things of that nature. If you don't have yourself set up in a way that you have those other outlets, you have those other aspects of your personality, you are volunteering, you are involved in the lives of your family members, and you have your own interests, it becomes really difficult. And I think it's really easy to fall into that trap and kind of like get that validation from your work and nowhere else, whether it be, from inside yourself, just knowing that you are a person who is whole and worthy and you have, purpose outside of your career, or otherwise. So
professional athletes too, you hear all the time as they retire, sort of finding their new purpose, where so much of your identity and so much of it was based on your achievement and constant achievement.
Absolutely. And I think some people's personalities are just wired that way, right? As being branded as the achiever, I think about kids at like a really young age, right? And when you label them as like being gifted or talented and the kind of pressure that puts on them, I think that's really real. It's interesting to see, looking back on my life and then looking at my kids as they grow to see sort of that dynamic, trying not to put so much pressure on them so they feel, that they can just be themselves and be happy enjoying what they do rather than being pushed in a certain direction.
That makes sense. Well, and I think the expectations put on them, and it used to be if you have decent grades and you have good scores, like that's great. And now it's like you play one varsity sport. Is that all?
Right. I know it's wild. And you're talking about your son who's a sophomore and thinking about schools. I'm sure, that dynamic is at play. Yeah. It's wild, a 4.0 GPA, like now you can get like a 4.3 or 4.5. And it's like,
yeah.
4.0 is straight A's. Like what is this now?
Yeah. If you take like the more advanced classes, there's a boost. I mean, it's like a whole formula. Yeah. And, it's sort of like, well, you do a sport and you do this, but what about leadership? But what about this? But what about that? But it's interesting also, on one hand, you hear about all the devices, the trend I'm seeing now in my own household, and they've played chess since fairly young age, but now chess is all the rage. So Pokemon Go used to be, that was our pandemic activity, and now it's chess.
Yeah, I kind of love that. It seems like, I feel like with our children's generation, there's almost going to be a flip back toward like more analog things like that. Like I feel like social media, it'll be interesting to see where social media is, 10 years from now, right? I mean, I know like it's just becoming, have you heard of the app or the platform Be Real?
No.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's more popular with that generation, but it gives you like a 2-minute window where you have to stop and do what you're like film like exactly what you're doing right then and there. So the essence of it is that it's like less manufactured than something like, Instagram would be, where it's this highly curated version of yourself.
Well, and I see them using technology in a different way. So, ChatGPT, and there's all this. I swear, any publication, it's all AI is all I can find about.
Yeah.
But then you have your kid turning around. It's like, oh yeah, I use it for homework. I'm like, can you do that? It's
I
like,
know. I think we're going to
apparently
see some real interesting legislation and development come out in the coming years related to the usage of AI, because I mean, you have inventors of some of this technology coming out and saying like, hey, this is really dangerous. Like, I invented it. I know how dangerous it can be. So
Yeah.
it'll be really interesting to see how we handle that as a culture and a society going forward.
It's fascinating. Fascinating. So you and I went deep, right? Like we talked about some
I got real into it.
So are you ready to get like really shallow?
I love it. Yes.
Okay. So sometimes just to get to know people, we've started playing a little round of the game called Two Truth and a Lie.
Oh, right.
I'm going to remind you, we're not an undergrad, so we're going to keep it like PG-13.
Okay.
So
it's not like truth or dare.
Yeah, not like truth or dare, although that might be something to consider. I will warn you that I've had people share that they play bagpipes. So some of the topics that have come up have been very unexpected, to say the least. So let's try it, and I will try my best to guess which one is the lie in the mix. But
okay,
let's give it a go.
All right, here we go. So I have visited 6 of the 7 continents.
Mm-hmm.
My sister and I have the same birthday, but we're not twins. And I was a child model.
So I'm going to say continents, absolutely true, because of the job you've done, and you just seem like the sort of person that would explore and travel. So I'm going to say that one is true. I feel like you were a child model. I think that's the truth, because I just don't think you would have, I don't think you would have made that up. So I think the birthday is the lie.
Okay. The 6 of 7 continents was actually the lie. I've only been to 5.
Okay. Is that all?
Oh, that's all. I would like to go to Australia. Antarctica, I feel like, is a long shot, but I have traveled a ton in my career, and just personally, I definitely love adventuring and traveling. Although I haven't done as much lately as I would like, but maybe soon. My sister and I have the same birthday. She was born on my 5th birthday on the day, so that has been fun over the years. When we were younger, we shared birthday parties, and I complained about it to no end to my parents. But it's been fun as we've grown older. And then I was very, very small scale child model locally. I was on the cover of like a local publication when I was around like 4 or 5 years old. So
right before your sister came along. Yeah. And put an end to your career.
Exactly. I know. I could have been a child model, but yeah.
She's Adrian, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It was really lovely to get to know you, and I just really appreciated all the insights. So thank you for your time.
It's great to chat with you too, Olga. Take care. Hopefully we'll get together again soon.
In person.
In person. Sounds great. Thank you. Have a good one.